So here's the walk I have. Oh, good. Yeah, video. Nice. All right, so I'm starting my desktop. I guess you can see that now, Casey. So, right? Awesome. So, let's see what's this. For this walk, I think this is like a little bit more polished. But basically, like what I want to go over right now is to go over Alan's question of like what happens in the Z rotation. Like what does it mean when the hips go across that point where the weight shift happens, where that weight transfer is. And even this, like I can tell just from my poses that this is a little bit off. And so I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3, 1, 2, 3. So there are my poses. This ideally would be straight on in this pose. And that's something that like looking for it in this like as a key pose or an extreme pose. That's exactly where you want it to be. So make sure like that's a very important thing that this isn't off in any way. Like as you're making this pose, it's not one way or the other. We want to capture this moment when the leg is straight over, or the body is straight over the leg, and the leg is extended straight over right there. So as that happens, we get a few things with the weight shift. A different view. Let me show you guys from let's bring two views in here so we can see front view and side view. So what this means in like it's tempting to think like, okay, as your hips go across, as the leg swings across from point A over here to point B, which is the next extreme. Also, I'll go into this in a little bit, but that pose is a little bit off as well. And let me just turn this into, well, actually let me keep it the way it is. As it goes over from one extreme to the other and the weight transfers across, it's tempting to think, okay, well, as that leg lifts up, the weight is going to transfer like this, and your hip is going to go up with your leg, and that actually, this is going back to like what it means to make a vanilla walk cycle, and what vanilla walk cycle means is like if as like normal for any sense of the word. That is how like the basic mechanics of a walk work. Now, the reason why it's a little bit deceptive is that once you start doing personality walks, you'll realize that every walk is a personality walk. Every character has their own walk. Every one of you has a distinct walk. We all have a distinct walk, just like as much as we have distinct fingerprints. Like it's just something the way that our body is made up every body is made up differently, and every walk is a little bit different. And so there's some people that have a lot of bounce in their step. There's some people that don't. There's some people that shuffle their feet, and there's just like all these different ways of a walk happening. But this is like taking into like the majority average and thinking, okay, this is usually what happens when someone walks, and this is the mechanics that happen when the body does this, and where the weight is shifting over, and how the leg swings across. And so, Alan, to answer your question, like in Bobby's video, like that's what it means is that as the hips swing across, it actually goes, the Z rotation actually goes down. And so it's like thinking about the leg is actually dragging the hip a little bit, and pulling it down a little bit before it goes up, and then the weight transfers over and then we get that that difference, something like that. Of course, I would want to, let me look at this from, do this regular graph editor, good, okay. And then go back into slide view. So when I do that, I also want to make sure, you know, that motion is pretty clean as it goes across from point A to point B. So that's why I'm just looking at that, because I knew I had a keyframe on there, on that breakdown frame, and I thought it might affect that transition, and I don't want that to. So as it goes across, you know, this isn't exactly what it's going to look like, but it's getting closer to that. But that's the idea, is that like as the hip goes across, you'll notice that there's something else that I did with this, and it's not just the rotation, but it's also the translation. So as that weight comes across here, we see that translation from the side, because basically we have to think that a lot of this weight, the weight from your body, is going to be over this point right here. So we want to show that, we want to reflect that in the weight of where the hip is going. So that's the best way to look at it, because that's something that, yeah, even when I was starting off on walks, it was kind of confusing. It was like, well, shouldn't it be when you walk, shouldn't that weight be up like that? But if you think about it, we don't really walk. That's kind of like a duck walk. If you do that, we have a little bit more of a straightforward walk. And again, going back to personality walks, once you get into personality walks after this assignment, you'll see that, yeah, there are walks. You know, that is actually a good way of defining a character by changing these things up. And that's also why this book, the Enter Survival Kit, I don't know if you guys have noticed that, but like most of this book is about walks and the variations of walks. So yeah, there's a lot of intricacies, and there's a lot of things that you can change up, and there's a lot of things that if you do something opposite of what is normally done, it creates a different effect. But it could also be valid. But for this walk in particular, this vanilla walk, it's basically taking all those mechanics that are the majority average and making them as plain and simple as possible. So does that make sense so far? Cool, good. Mark, so the extreme rotation positions are, let me cam you so we can talk about that. Left, there it is. Hey, Mark.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So during the lecture, I understood it that the one extreme was when the weight shift, when the knee breaks and he drops his weight onto that one leg, that's when you're going to see the hip sort of drop because it's being, yeah. So that's the one extreme. So the other one is, I guess, as the leg is that when that leg is straight and the other leg is high up in the air? Is that the other extreme? That's the one I'm fuzzy on.
Okay, so that's a good question. Going over the two extremes for the walk. Basically, with this walk, this is of course your key, and then this will be your other key. So it's like step to step, right? And so everything in between is you could basically classify these as extremes, because this is going to be your extreme down. And this switching over is your extreme up. So those are where the two extremes are, and then
okay.
Where let's see, I messed this up because of the rotation. This could also be included as an extreme. I would say, you know, once you get into like the definitions of like extremes versus breakdowns and everything, like sometimes they can get a little bit fuzzy, but actually more especially extremes versus keyframes can get a little bit fuzzy sometimes with mechanical animation, meaning like if it's not just acting, then that's where the extremes and the keys can get a little bit like, okay, that maybe it could be a key. I would say that this is the key, and that step is the key, because those are the two most important poses to tell what's happening, right? To say like your character is walking and taking a step. So those would be the most important. And then the next extremes is like that most extreme down, the most extreme up, and then this one right here is that transition. So I guess arguably that's the breakdown right there.
And would you say the X rotation, which is I guess his nose going up and down if you had one,
Uh-huh.
is that kind of just going to trail behind the up and down movement? Because it's not really driven by the legs, is it? Okay, so it's not driven by the legs. It's just trailing behind the up and down movement. Okay.
That's right. It's just like an overlap. That's the way to think of it. So yeah, as it goes up and down, you get that rotation to counter that. It's a simple overlap. So cool. Any other questions?
No, that's it for me.
All right, great. Thanks, Mark. All right. Any other questions about that? What are you guys talking about here? Survivor Animation Mentor Edition. That's funny. Okay, so with walks, everyone's clear on what this assignment's calling for, right? Which is basically the poses that I have here. And let's see, I'll go over this next week, but I want you to let me delete some of these keyframes here. And then next week I'll explain why they're in here, because that's more of a polishy thing. So with that, you're not going to see one thing about like these rotations. You're not going to see a lot of them on the side view. That doesn't mean, or these weight shifts like this. You're not going to see that. Like I'm doing this right here, and you don't really see that happening in the side view. That doesn't mean that you guys shouldn't put them in there. By all means, you should put them in there. And also when you're animating this, of course, your side view is the most important, but you should always be looking at it from every angle and just making sure that your pose and your balance, your weight, everything is working correctly, because it will actually make it a lot more believable, even in an orthographic side view. So even stuff like this, where the leg comes across, this again, like the way the foot travels from point A to point B, very dependent on the person. Like it's just like there's so many different ways that a foot can go up and over. It can go around, it can flip around like this, it can do all these things. We'll get into that when we get into personality walks a lot more. But just know that there is something more than just going from like a straight linear line across. That there is some sort of depth that should happen there. It should go out and around as well. And this is stuff that you guys should be thinking about now, even in your blocking, because it just adds a little bit more to your character's weight. Yeah, exactly. That will make a huge difference in the way the walk is perceived. So yeah, that's one thing is the way the weight transfers, the weight shifts are. Speaking of weight and balance, well, first of all, let me put this. We also know that everything here for this assignment is in stepped mode. And so I still have some frames here. Let me go back to let's key everything, and then I will delete They are not important right now. Delete. And then, yeah. So all that in stepped mode. And I think I gave it too many frames here, because I'm starting from frame 1. The computer's being slow too. It's like once I select everything, it just kind of stops. So this is where it started on frame 0. So we have that, the 2 key poses, right? And in this case, it's 2 steps, right? So there would actually be 4 key poses. 1, 2, and then 3. Shift over and then back to that pose, but like further down. As the extreme pose is like this is where the weight comes down, and then this is the transition, and then the next pose the extreme up, and then going across to where the next contact. So with this, the best advice I can give you about starting this animation is just make sure that your contact poses are exactly the way you want them. And so be careful of this. Like a lot of times I'll see this sort of thing where the weight is shifted back. The weight is maybe, I usually don't see it shifted too far forward. This is like, for some reason, this is like the most often I see. And you want this to make sure that your the weight here, like I might even start this back further, because you want that to be very centered. And that's why I even like put that on the grid on the center line, so I can try to make that as like centered between the 2 as possible. Try to think of this part as like the base of a wheel, because as it goes across, it actually does that sort of thing like a wheel would almost. And that's something we'll get into more when I start to polish things up. But that foot roll, that's why they call it a roll, because there's one foot that's rolling up while the other foot is actually, it comes down sharply, but you can actually find a moment where it's actually like rolling between, and you can get like a really good arc in there. You can see that arc. And then as this foot comes up, there's one thing that you want this to be, this pose, let's see, ball roll, right? You want it to be pretty, see, what I usually do is I use the rotation. And the reason why is because I don't, if I use the foot roll itself, then I actually have to switch between the 2. And let me just go into what I'm talking about here in more detail. So let's say that I have this foot at here on this flat ground, and I pose it with the foot roll itself, and that looks great. It's like that works. And then as I transition over to this next pose, let me actually continue. Come on, Maya. All right. I'll just copy that. So if I were to continue this foot roll here, that's fine, but there comes a point when this foot has to come off the ground, and when it does, I have to take out that foot roll. So if this is, I take out that steps mode right here, and I can actually see this transition. There's a moment when that foot roll has to go to 0, and then this has to actually rotate, and that's fine. If you guys can do it that way, if it makes more sense for you guys to do it that way, then by all means do it. But this is the reason why I prefer to just rotate and then go against the ball roll, and it just makes things cleaner in my eyes. If it does it for you, then that's fine. Don't think you're not doing it right. Let me reverse that. So instead, as it goes up, like if I rotate the foot, then I'll rotate it against that and use the ball roll to straighten it out a little bit. And as you see, like this is where this is my favorite tool to just put a little reference point in here with the foot. And again, I'll go over this a little bit more when you polish it, but just know that that's why I do it. It's just so I'm not switching between a foot roll and then going into the rotation of the foot. I'm keeping it all on rotate X and just using a little bit of ball roll. What that results in is like you'll probably end up using you'll key every frame as the foot comes off the ground. And so it's just a matter of taste, basically. It's like what one will work for you, and maybe the other one won't. Does that make sense, though, so far? Okay, great. Great. So what else? Okay, so balance. This is balanced. As this comes across, like I want this to be somewhat at the point of an extreme. And Bobby goes over this in the video too. But you don't want what you want to avoid actually is the foot being too far pushed. Like that, like I would say that's too far. If you get an angle that's actually going past the toe like that, where it feels like the toe is actually snapping, I would try to avoid that. I would say something a little bit in between that. You want it to be a pretty extreme angle, but you don't want it to be so extreme that it looks like it's painful or anything. So even like something like that, I'd say is probably okay. The toe starting to come off the ground is okay. But just make sure that toe pivot in a foot roll is right here. It's this point. So be very mindful of that when you're doing the foot roll, like when you're posing that the foot is going to roll from that origin. You can have this flat on the ground too. I mean, by all means, that's okay for this pose. But you might want to start that transition a little bit. The transition of this part of the toe coming off the ground, you might want to start that a little, like from this pose, like a little before this pose actually. It all depends. Like you want it to snap off the ground, but you don't want it to be too much. You also don't want it to be too soft either, to where it looks like it's like just moving the entire time. You want that little push. So that's where we'll go into that when we polish this animation, and I'll get into that a lot more, of like how to get that result. But for now, just know that that's the pivot area. And then with this one, like I was mentioning before, you want that to be straight. A lot of times I'll see it even when I open this file, it was back here, because when I started polishing and I started putting those keyframes in there, it started to move that back. So always be careful. Like that is the point of where when we make this pose, that's the point we want to capture that moment of like that's where the leg is the straightest. And then here as it comes up, something like this, you can have this foot that's on the ground. It's okay to have it on the ground. I wouldn't go too far with it. Again, like with the walk, a lot of it is about minimal. Like how a walk is a very efficient thing that we do. And so with that said, when we lift our legs, when we do all these things, we try to exert the least amount of energy as possible, and our bodies just do that naturally. So we're not using up all our energy just from walking. That's why it's really hard to walk in snow and sand and stuff like that, because when we do that, we push ourselves too hard, and we lift our legs maybe too high and our bodies too much, and that's why we get tired or a lot easier. And so with that, like that's why I say like with something like this, you probably want to keep it a little bit, nothing too crazy, not too high. And as this foot comes across, this is like the tricky part. Like as it comes across here too, it's almost on the ground. It's basically like I'd rather see it actually even intersect through the ground a little bit than be too high, and have it be like way up here as it comes across, or even worse, like way up here, because that's more of a stomp. Like that's where you're putting personality into that walk. And if I just spline this area, then you'll see if I have my pose up here, I have to now go that far with that transition. Whereas if it's down here, that transition is a lot smaller off the ground. And then once we start smoothing these out, you'll also notice that the less extreme you go between each pose, the less chance of a knee pop you'll get. And that's something that happens a lot. You get a knee pop, especially on this character. This character is actually worse than most. But it's a result of being going too far with the actual transition as the leg comes across. So yeah, it looks painful too. So any other questions about this? So basically, for this walk cycle, you want a very simple one with no personality. Yeah, no personality whatsoever. For whatever that's worth. There should be no like the more up and down you put, the more extremes that you put into this walk. Like let's say if I were to put with this extreme down, if I made it too far down and this extreme up too far up, I'm starting to add some personality into that walk. And so I want to be careful that it should be like as vanilla as like minimal as possible. So yeah, no personality here. Next assignment after this, you put personality. You have a lot of fun with it. But for here, it's just like the very basics. Does the foot rotation change and why? Yes, it does. So as the foot comes up off the ground, it can actually change in every axis. But yeah, and this is what I mean is like when the foot goes from point A to point B, it really depends on the person that's walking and on like how that's going to be. Like if that person's pigeon-toed, it's going to be a little bit different than the opposite. What's the opposite of pigeon-toe? It's like if you go across like that, that you're going to get that personality in there. Duck walk, exactly. And then a lot of times that foot when it's here, it rotates out this way, but not all the time. For vanilla walk, this sort of thing, like I would say, keep it more oriented out. It doesn't have to be very extreme. It shouldn't be very extreme, but it should be something like that, oriented just a little bit out. and swinging out too, like it swings out in that X direction instead of like another. That's another thing that you can get with the personality walk, is like bringing it in and having it come across. But yeah, just think of the less extreme that you put on every one of these. All these elements should be in there, but the less extreme they are, the better. The more you're going to get close to that. Yeah, exactly. That's what in would be. Be weak. I don't know. So pretty straightforward, right? I mean, so far. Great. Let's do this. Exactly. Dominic, did you want to go over? Well, do you guys want to go over the keep alive part? And Dominic, did you have some questions for this round? Okay, great. Let's talk. Are there different workflows for doing walk cycles? Do you do your walk cycle in the same steps that Bobby showed us? Julian, that's a great question. There are different workflows for doing a walk. Sometimes, like there. Okay, so there used to be a way of the way I was taught by these Pixar animators, the way that they originally did it. And I think this was actually stemmed from John Lasseter and Pete Docter, and they had this way of doing a walk cycle, and it was layering the walk, and they would take the up and down, and they would just have that moving along the spline, so basically a bouncing ball, and then they would translate it forward, and it would just be without the legs or anything like that. It would just be splined, and then they would just start incorporating all these things into the walk and layering it down. And I used to do walks that way, but I noticed that if you actually have your poses in there, and start in not necessarily, I don't really necessarily start in stepped mode, because I don't know if you guys noticed, but when I open this file, it basically, for the most part, the walk worked. I had those splines in there, and it works pretty well. And that's why I don't really use step. Just use step for this because the assignment called for it. But know that when you do this, you should be able to have a really clean transition once you go from point A to point B. So now that's the way I generally do my walk cycles, is that I get these poses, because these two poses are the most important poses. Knowing where one foot is going to pick up off the ground and the other one's going to land is the most important part, especially for me, for understanding where that walk is. So this is actually a really good way of understanding, if I'm starting a walk, I need to make sure that I know where the feet are going to be placed, because that in turn will affect how the body is going to get there. So yeah, does that make sense? So yeah, and yes, Sean, it should be in step mode, definitely. That's a big part of this assignment. So great. Okay, Dominic, let's talk to you. Dominic, and let me open Taylor. It's too bad I couldn't get Am to work for this. How you doing, man?
I'm good. You?
Good. I'm doing all right.
Okay. So basically, my question is, because this is for the first assignment about Taylor, I only had 2 frames, 2 contact frames, which was on the landing and the squash. And then when I was doing the takeoff, it was already in midair, and that's why you suggest me to add at least one more contact frame. To actually see the characters pushing through the floor. The thing is, it seems more natural now, but the thing is, it feels like my timing is too slow. Actually, my character is stopping. I don't know if you know what I mean.
Let's look at it. I wish I could bring up the.
Okay.
I can't bring it up in AMP, unfortunately, but we can at least look at it on the video. Is it in your public review by any chance?
Pardon me?
Is it in your public review?
No.
Okay, well, I'll go to, let's see, classroom. And where are you now? There you are. So,
like especially in the last jump, like I don't know if it's like you can see more about this one. It's like instead of just like being fluid and going through it, like I feel like the character is stopping. So I don't know if I'm not doing it right, or if it's actually supposed to be like this.
So you feel the character is stopping right?
When there's too much contact
right
frame,
there?
Well, yeah. Put no just after that, the very last jump when he's exiting. Yeah, this one.
Okay, let's look at that. If you feel like your character is stopping, or there's some sort of slowdown in that between the contact frames, it means that the spacing after the contact frame is too close. So the way you're going to get more momentum after a contact frame from here, and I don't see it here. Like I feel like this is fine, but if you feel like that's stopping, I would move this this frame out a little bit more, so there's more spacing between the two to get that push off to be snappier.
Like a bigger acceleration, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
But
so it's like that stretch, and then after that, if it feels like it's sticking to the ground, that means those two frames are a little bit too close together, one after the other. And so if you don't get that, then, or if you want to avoid that, then you push it off the ground, or you make that spacing farther apart.
Okay, because I was more thinking that the problem was during the contact positions. Those three frames. It's like maybe I don't know. Like if you're watching a squirrel running, for instance, like it's like it's basically running in the like it's constant. You know, it's not like jumping then stopping, jumping and stopping. You know, it's just constant. So it feels like it's not doing that.
So you feel a stop here. Between that, like you actually, I think you're.
Yeah, those two frames. It feels like the character is stopping actually. So I don't know.
That's funny because I don't see that.
No.
Mm-mm.
Because maybe it's the contrast. Because the first version, since I had like only two contact frames, and now it's three. Like I don't know, maybe it feels more like it's stopping. Like even those first small jumps, it feels like it's not like going in a constant speed.
You mean these first small jumps here?
Yeah, even those. It feels like between every jump, he's stopping for like a small amount of time.
I mean, to me that feels proper though. That feels right. Like I feel that weight there, and that's what works for me.
Okay.
So it may be a case of just like overanalyzing it and like looking at it too closely, but I think that looks really good. Like we're getting that weight transfer.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, like we'll go over. Like, we should look up a scroll video and like show me what you're talking about too, because I think that would be a good way of analyzing that. But this has good momentum, and more importantly, it has good weight, and I feel like that works really well.
Okay, but maybe it's only me. It's just it feels like it's not going at a constant speed and it's stopping. That's what that's what I feel. So maybe it's the right thing, but I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it looks great. So, does anybody else feel that? I mean, like, let's ask the class. Do you guys think that it feels like it's stopping? Like, it has weight and it has momentum, and I think that those are working really well. If you don't have those contact frames, you're taking out the weight, and there are times when if a squirrel is moving, that it's those short little hops. Like if it's moving from point A to point B, you're going to want a constant, but you still have to have that weight transfer happening, or else it just won't look. It'll be too bouncy. Like it'll just look like the ball is just bouncing around, and not actually being propelled off the ground by its own force.
Okay. Well, I don't know what to say about that anymore.
I don't know what to say either. I think it looks good. I think you're overanalyzing. Yeah.
Maybe I've spent too much time on it, that's why.
That is what happens. Trust me, that is what happens. When you spend too much time and when you look at your animation for too long, you start to see things that you think look wrong. And that's why it's good to show it to someone else. Also, just like maybe look at it in a mirror or something like that. Like there's ways of like just like taking a fresh perspective of it. But yeah, trust me, that's just going to be part of being an animator. You can look at something for too long and just you start to it starts to.
Is it like a good way to work? Like when you spend too much time on seeing the same thing, you just like actually do a mirror of that thing. Like you flip it, so instead of going to like one side, it's going on the other side. So it's like
yeah. And actually, that's something that it's very helpful to see. Like, okay, well, I've never. Some people say like looking at it backwards helps, and I've never found that to help. But if that helps you, that's great. But usually, it's just like I would look at it from. I would just flip this camera and look at it from a different angle and see, like, it will give you a new perspective on that.
Okay.
And so yeah, that's what I'd recommend for that.
Okay. So so basically that was my only question besides the the old how to keep it alive. So
yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Thanks, Dominic.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions here? Yeah, you could do that too. I mean, there's again, like this goes back to how you work is it's really up to you. Like there's no like one way of doing anything. So yeah, if you shrink the video, if you watch it from a distance, what helps me honestly is to get up, and if you have other work to do, which in this case you guys don't, you guys are working on like one assignment. But the best thing for me is to like say, okay, I have something else to do. This is my eyes aren't really helping me right now. So I will go to another shot and I'll work on that for a while, and then I'll go back to that one and look at it later. And then that way, if you even spend like half a day away from that shot and then come back, or a full day and come back and look at it again, you'll see something else. But if you just stare at it constantly, it's like the thing with that, it's like saying, if you say one word over and over and over and over and over again, that word will start to sound really weird, right? It's the same sort of phenomenon where if you look at something over and over and over again, like you'll start to get that, like you'll start to get that like you'll become kind of numb to it, and it'll start to not look like it looks to everybody else. Yeah, definitely. But if you have to send it in an hour, then you just have to send it. You have no choice. There's sometimes where you just have to concede. So with this, let's just go over a few little things here with, I'm going to start from here. Now, I think a lot of you guys did a really good thing with keeping Taylor alive. Like everyone had like a good way of doing that, and that of course was with the tail itself. And view. Okay. But let's see. I didn't really get to finish this, so and I only have 6 minutes to do anything with it. So I'm just going to show you like a little things that I would do. So let me see. I think there's a good. I just don't want to clean this jump up too much. So let's say that this jump looked okay. Pretend. And then my character has to settle, come to a stop and settle. And of course, every situation is different. But there's this thing that I like to refer to, and it's just keeping pixels alive. It basically means that your character is breathing in a sense without going back to the point of like showing the actual breath. Like we talked about, if you show a breath in animation, that usually you should have a point of showing it. If you just have a character standing there and you show that breathing, you animate it, it'll look a little bit odd. It'll look a little bit forced. So that's the way I like to think of it, is like you're just keeping pixels moving, and that in turn keeps your character alive. So with this, like let's say after this jump, I would think about like, okay, what's my character thinking about after this jump? And if they're just jumping and like they jump in the air and they're just like, oh, I just did that. So there'd be like a little bit more of like the animation before, they tumbled out of control and they caught themselves and they're just like, well, there's that, like I corrected myself, or maybe like trying to act a little bit more casual about it, but there should be some sort of thing other than just hitting that pose. And like I said earlier, using the tail is a great way that you guys use to keep that character alive. But there's little subtleties that you can do with with any character that can keep those pixels moving. So here, maybe just even like a squash. I'm going to have to offset that a little bit. But even something like that, where it's not really a breath, but it's more of a reaction. And actually, I would say this is a little bit more, like we want to feel some sort of bounce there. So I have that first reaction, and I don't want this part looks a little bit too like this is a fine line between keeping a character alive and having a drift. And the drift is the thing that you want to avoid at all costs, because the drift is something in computer animation where it looks like you're just like having a linear translation, and you see it a lot in bad computer animation where it just looks like something's just kind of floating across the screen linearly. And so that's the fine line, and this is going to take practice and experience for you guys to get it just right. But like that, because I can see so much change of my character going across the screen, I would say that's a drift. I want like a fraction of that to keep my character alive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, let's see, like this value over here, so like 4 frames out, and I'm going to middle mouse over here and keyframe it. I'm going to copy that value, and I'm just going to delete this right now. So it goes over, and there's just like a little bit of a, so maybe that timing could be a little bit better. And then maybe here, to go back, I'll take maybe something like that, a fraction of it over here, middle mouse over here, far over, and then if my character is just standing in that shot, there's a little bit of movement there between here and frame 90. It's not breathing, but it's doing just a little bit of this, keeping those pixels moving. And so for that, it doesn't have like a complete static motion. And if we look at what's happening here in the graph editor, with the squash and stretch, there's just like the slightest bit going across there. And, you know, maybe I would want to add a little bit of rotation to that. Maybe I'd want to, you know, layer it with something else. But even just that, even just keeping those pixels moving is going to breathe some life into the character without actually having each breath happen. Does that make sense? Great. So once we get into characters, I'll show you a lot of ways that I do that, but really it's just a matter of like just taking a value and just like letting it continue a little bit further. So it's really, really subtle, but it's there. Okay? So yeah, that's something I can elaborate on. I can continue to elaborate on that, but that for now is basically how I do that. So, are there any other questions? Today? Is there any situation some parts of the body will not move at all while something else is moving to take the audience attention? Yes. In fact, start noticing that in like anytime you watch especially computer animated movie, start noticing like background characters or even characters that are listening to another character, and notice what the animator does with the character. Sometimes it's just like a really subtle thing. Sometimes it's only the root moving across and with like a few eye blinks or something, and it's just like the most subtle thing, but it keeps, or you know, like maybe just like a little part of the body. Usually the root will do the trick, but sometimes maybe just like the head or the eyes or something where exactly what you're saying, like it keeps the audience attention away from it. But a lot of times I see I've done that several times, to where it's just like a little slow movement that keeps that character alive, but it's not, you don't have to worry about every single part. So we just open up the graph editor. How do you increase the size of the curves after zooming in those frames? So that is, you hold down Shift and Alt together, and then left and middle mouse together, and then move it back and forth. It's 4 buttons, but it's very helpful. And then you can go up and down with it too. Yeah, I remember the first time someone showed me that, it was like a revelation. I was like, "What? How did you do that?" And I totally forget about it because it's just like ingrained into my natural reflexes. But yeah, that's how you do that. So cool. That's it, guys. So I gotta go. Any questions you have, please email me. And next week we'll talk a little bit more about walk cycles and how we put those together. All right. Snapshot for that. Yeah.